The banker's laughter echoed through the marble halls of Rhyolite Savings and Loan, each guffaw piercing Clara Everly's chest like a knife, and she clutched her leather satchel tighter as her cheeks burned with humiliation while the portly man behind the mahogany desk wiped tears from his eyes. It was May of 1906, and the Nevada mining town of Rhyolite was booming with prospectors and businessmen, but apparently not with opportunities for a 23-year-old woman who wanted to open a mercantile. "Miss Everly, surely you understand," Mr. Pemberton wheezed between chuckles, straightening his wire-rimmed spectacles. "A woman running a general store. What collateral could you possibly offer? You have no property, no husband, no male relative willing to vouch for you. This is a business, not a charity." Clara stood from the uncomfortable wooden chair, her spine rigid despite the trembling in her hands. "I have a sound business plan, Mr. Pemberton. I have worked at Thompson's General Store for 5 years. I know inventory, I know suppliers, I understand profit margins. The miners need reliable goods, and I can provide them. Thompson's is closing because old man Thompson died," Pemberton said, his amusement fading into condescension. "His son has no interest in staying in Nevada. But that doesn't mean a slip of a girl can step in and run the operation. Good day, Miss Everly." She wanted to argue, to throw her carefully prepared documents in his smug face, but her throat constricted with unshed tears. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked through the bank's heavy doors into the bright afternoon sun. Main Street bustled with activity, freight wagons rattling past, miners calling out to each other, piano music drifting from one of the many saloons. Rhyolite had exploded from nothing to a town of thousands in just a few years, built on the promise of gold and silver in the surrounding hills. Clara walked toward the boarding house where she rented a small room, her mind churning. She had saved every penny from her wages at Thompson's, lived frugally, planned meticulously. The building that housed Thompson's General Store was available for lease, and the widow Thompson had promised Clara first option if she could secure the funds. But without a loan, without capital to purchase initial inventory and pay the first months of rent, her dream would die before it began. She was so lost in thought that she nearly collided with a mountain of a man leading a pack mule down the street. She stumbled backward, and a hand shot out to steady her, fingers wrapping completely around her upper arm with surprising gentleness despite their obvious strength. "Pardon me, miss," a deep voice rumbled. Clara looked up and up, her eyes traveling past a broad chest covered in a worn leather vest and faded blue shirt, past shoulders that seemed impossibly wide, to a face weathered by sun and wind. The man had to be well over 6 feet tall, with long dark hair tied back with a leather cord, a thick beard framing a strong jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His arms were corded with muscle, visible even through his shirt sleeves, and everything about him spoke of raw power tempered by careful control. "No, it was my fault," Clara managed, acutely aware that his hand still steadied her. "I was not watching where I was going." He released her arm and took a step back, giving her space. "You look troubled, if you do not mind me saying." Something about his directness, the concern in those gray eyes, loosened her tongue. "The bank refuses to give me a loan. I want to open a mercantile, but apparently women are not considered creditworthy no matter their qualifications." The man's expression darkened. "Pemberton, you know him, enough to know he is a fool." He adjusted the rope leading his mule, which was loaded with furs and what looked like mining equipment. "I am Victor Wright. I trap and prospect in the mountains above town. Clara Everly." She studied him more carefully. She had heard of mountain men, the solitary figures who lived in the wilderness, and came to town only for supplies. They were legends whispered about in the boarding house. Men who could track anything, survive anything, who were more comfortable with nature than civilization. You live up there year-round, most of it. Winter can drive even a stubborn man down to warmer elevations sometimes, but I have a cabin about 10 miles up the mountain. He tilted his head, considering her. What kind of mercantile did you want to open? Clara found herself explaining her entire plan to this stranger, words tumbling out about the inventory she would stock, the fair prices she would charge, the credit system she would establish for miners between paydays. Victor listened without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "How much do you need?" "I beg your pardon, for the loan." "How much?" $800, Clara said, then laughed bitterly. "Why do you ask?" "Because I have more than that in the bank and no use for most of it. I trade furs, find enough gold to keep me supplied, but money means little in the mountains." Victor's gaze was steady, serious. "If Pemberton will not lend to you on your own merit, perhaps he will reconsider if someone co-signs." Clara's heart stuttered. "You do not even know me. Why would you risk your money on a stranger?" "I know men like Pemberton. They mock what they do not understand and deny opportunities to people who might show them up." He shifted his weight, and she noticed he moved with surprising grace for such a large man. "And I believe someone willing to fight for their dream deserves a chance to prove themselves. If you are half as capable as you sound, you will succeed. If you are not, well, I can afford the loss." "I would pay you back," Clara said quickly. "With interest. I would put it in writing." "I believe you." Victor gestured back toward the bank. "Shall we go remind Pemberton how business works?" The walk back to the bank felt surreal. Clara was aware of the curious glances from townsfolk as she strode beside the massive mountain man. Victor attracted attention simply by existing, and she supposed it was unusual to see him in town with a woman. When they entered the bank, Pemberton's face shifted from surprise to poorly concealed irritation. "Mr. Wright, what a surprise. Here to make a deposit." "Here to co-sign a loan for Miss Everly," Victor said flatly. $800, reasonable terms. Pemberton's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. "Mr. Wright, surely you cannot be serious. You barely know this woman. She has no experience running a business independently, no collateral." "No, I have collateral," Victor interrupted. "My land deed, my cabin, my accounts here. More than enough to secure $800. Miss Everly has the experience and the plan. Draw up the papers." The banker's face turned an alarming shade of red. "This is highly irregular." "This is perfectly legal," Victor countered. "Unless you are suggesting there is some reason my money is not as good as anyone else's." Pemberton clearly wanted to refuse, but he was a businessman above all else. If Victor Wright was willing to guarantee the loan, the bank would profit from the interest regardless of who repaid it. "Fine," he bit out. "But Miss Everly should understand that if she defaults, Mr. Wright will be held responsible for the full amount." "She understands," Victor said, glancing at Clara. "And she will not default." The certainty in his voice sent warmth through her chest. They spent the next hour reviewing terms and signing documents. Clara's hand shook slightly as she wrote her name on the final paper, but beside her signature was Victor's bold scrawl, and that made all the difference. When they finally emerged back into the afternoon light, she felt dizzy with relief and disbelief. "Thank you," she said, the words entirely inadequate for what he had done. "Mr. Wright, I do not know how to properly express my gratitude." "Victor," he corrected. "And you can thank me by building that mercantile into something successful. When do you plan to open?" "As soon as possible." "I need to secure the building lease, order inventory, set up the interior." Her mind was already racing through the endless tasks ahead. It will take weeks, maybe months. I can help with the building work, Victor offered. I am in town for a few days to trade my furs and restock supplies. Might as well make myself useful. Clara started to protest, then stopped herself. Pride would not build shelves or repair the store's leaking roof. I would appreciate that enormously, though I insist on compensating you somehow. Keep your books balanced and pay back that loan, Victor said. That will be compensation enough. Over the following days, Clara learned that Victor Wright was a man of few words but decisive action. He negotiated the building lease with Mrs. Thompson on Clara's behalf, his imposing presence and no-nonsense attitude securing better terms than Clara could have managed alone. He spent long hours repairing the store's weather-damaged roof, his powerful frame moving across the beams with surprising confidence. Clara worked beside him whenever possible, painting walls, organizing storage spaces, making lists of needed inventory. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" she asked one afternoon as they worked together to build sturdy shelving along the back wall. Victor measured and cut boards with practiced efficiency while Clara held pieces steady for him to nail into place. "About 6 years," he said, marking another board. "Came west after the Spanish-American War. Served in Cuba, saw too much death, wanted silence and space." Clara absorbed that information. He would have been quite young during the war, perhaps only 19 or 20. Now he would be around 25, she calculated, only a couple of years older than herself. "Do you ever get lonely up there?" Victor paused, hammer in hand. "Sometimes. But loneliness in nature is different from loneliness among people. Cleaner, somehow. The mountains do not lie or disappoint. They simply are." "That sounds like someone hurt you," Clara said softly. He drove a nail with 3 powerful strikes before answering. "Lost my family to fever when I was 17. Parents, 2 younger sisters, then lost men I commanded in the war. After that, the quiet of the mountains seemed like mercy." "I am sorry." Clara understood loss. Her own parents had died in a factory fire in Boston when she was 18, leaving her orphaned and nearly destitute. She had come west with a family as a governess, only to be dismissed when they fell on hard times. Working at Thompson's had been her salvation, giving her purpose and eventually this dream. "Is that why you helped me? Because you understand what it is to need a chance?" "Partly." Victor's gray eyes met hers, and something in their depths made her breath catch. "Also because you reminded me that not everyone gives up. You walked out of that bank with your head high, already planning your next move. That takes strength." "Or stubbornness," Clara said with a small smile. "Strength," Victor repeated firmly. "Do not diminish yourself. Pemberton tried to make you feel small, but you are not small. You are fierce." No one had ever called her fierce before. Proper, certainly, capable occasionally, but fierce. That was new, and she found she liked how it sounded coming from him. The work continued. Clara placed orders with suppliers in San Francisco and Salt Lake City, carefully allocating every dollar. She hired a young man named Timothy to help with heavy inventory once it arrived. Slowly, impossibly, Thompson's general store transformed into Everly's Mercantile. Clara painted the new sign herself, gold letters on a dark green background, and Victor helped her mount it above the door. "It is real now," she whispered, staring up at her name displayed for all the town to see. "It has been real since the moment you decided to make it happen," Victor said beside her. "This is just everyone else catching up." The grand opening was set for a Saturday in mid-June. The night before, Clara was too anxious to sleep. She walked through the store for the 100th time, adjusting displays, checking inventory lists, imagining all the ways things could go wrong. She was surprised when a knock came at the door well after closing time. Through the window, she saw Victor's distinctive silhouette. She unlocked the door. "What are you doing here? Saw your lamp burning. Figured you were worrying yourself sick." He held up a basket. "Brought dinner." Clara stepped aside to let him in, touched by the gesture. They sat together on the floor behind the counter, the store dark except for a single lamp, and shared bread, cheese, dried meat, and surprisingly good apples. Victor must have paid dearly for fresh fruit in a desert mining town. What if no one comes tomorrow? Clara asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if the miners resent buying from a woman? What if I ordered the wrong inventory or priced things too high or— Clara. Victor's hand covered hers where it rested on the floorboards between them. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. "You have prepared better than most men would. Your prices are fair, your stock is smart, and you are offering credit terms that will make miners loyal customers. Tomorrow will be successful because you have earned that success." She turned her hand under his, lacing their fingers together. It was bold, perhaps inappropriate, but she needed the anchor of his presence. "Why did you really help me, Victor? The truth this time." He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then softly, "Because from the moment I saw you on the street, angry and hurt but not defeated, something in me recognized something in you. I have been alone in those mountains for 6 years, telling myself I preferred it that way. Then you came along with your fierce eyes and your impossible dreams, and suddenly the silence seemed less like mercy and more like cowardice." Clara's heart pounded. "What are you saying?" "I am saying you make me want to come down from the mountain," Victor said, his gray eyes intense in the lamplight. "I am saying that helping you build this dream has felt more purposeful than anything I have done since I left the army. I am saying I am not ready to go back to my cabin and leave you behind." "Then do not leave," Clara whispered. "Stay. Help me run the mercantile, or keep doing whatever you wish, but come back to town more often. I do not want you to disappear into the mountains and become a memory." Victor lifted his free hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "If I stay, if I keep coming back, people will talk. A single woman and a mountain man. The gossips will have a feast." "Let them talk," Clara said, leaning into his touch. "I have never been conventional anyway." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face into something beautiful, and then he was kissing her. His lips were soft despite the beard, the kiss tender despite his strength. Clara's hands found his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle there, and she kissed him back with all the emotion churning inside her. Gratitude, yes, but also affection that had been building since that first meeting on the street. Attraction that made her pulse race whenever he was near. Something that felt dangerously close to love, though it seemed impossible to fall so quickly. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "Your opening day will be perfect," he said, "and I will be here to see it." He was right. The next morning, miners and townsfolk alike crowded into Everly's mercantile, curious about the new establishment and its determined owner. Clara worked from dawn until well past dark, selling goods, arranging credit, answering questions, proving herself with every transaction. Victor helped where he could, his presence both reassuring and useful when moving heavy sacks of flour or beans. By the end of the day, Clara's cash box was full, her inventory noticeably depleted, and her feet aching. "I need to place another order already," she said, laughing with exhausted delight as she and Victor counted the day's earnings after locking the door. "We sold twice what I anticipated." "Told you," Victor said with satisfaction. This town needed someone who understood what miners actually require, not just what Pemberton's friends wanted to sell them. Clara tallied the numbers, her careful bookkeeping already showing a profit for the first day. At this rate, I can start repaying the loan within a few months. No rush, Victor said. Build your emergency fund first. Business has slow periods. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Clara ran the mercantile 6 days a week, closed on Sundays for a day of rest and bookkeeping. Victor remained in town, taking a room at the boarding house near Clara's. He helped in the store sometimes, but mostly he spent his days doing odd jobs around Rhyolite, using his considerable skills to repair buildings, dig wells, and handle tasks that required strength and competence. He was hired frequently, his reputation for solid work spreading quickly. Clara found herself looking forward to their evenings together, when they would share dinner and talk about everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, his dreams of being a teacher before the fever took his family, his love of the wilderness that had saved him when civilization felt too painful. He learned about her years in Boston, the terror and grief of losing her parents, her determination to build something of her own so she would never be helpless again. "You are remarkable," Victor told her one night in late July as they walked along the edge of town under a brilliant canopy of stars. The desert air was finally cooling after another scorching day. "I am stubborn," Clara corrected. "Remarkable," he repeated. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Clara, these past 2 months have been the best of my life. I know it has not been long, but I need you to know that my feelings for you are not casual. When I look at you, I see my future. I see a partner, a companion, someone who makes me want to be better." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "I feel the same way. You have given me so much, Victor. Not just the loan, but confidence, support, partnership. You see me as I want to be seen, not as the world tries to diminish me." "Then let me court you properly," Victor said. "Let me prove that I am serious about building a life here with you." "You do not need to prove anything," Clara said, stepping closer to him. "But yes, I would like that very much." Their courtship became the talk of Rhyolite, though most of the gossip was surprisingly positive. The miners liked Clara's fair dealing and respected Victor's competence. The more respectable townsfolk were initially scandalized by the unconventional match, but Clara's success was hard to argue with. By August, Everly's Mercantile was the most popular general store in town, and Clara had hired 2 additional employees to keep up with demand. She paid her first loan installment in September, right on schedule. Pemberton accepted the payment with ill grace, clearly disappointed that she had not failed. Victor was there with her, solid and proud at her side, and the banker's sour expression only made the moment sweeter. "How does it feel?" Victor asked as they left the bank. "Like freedom," Clara said honestly. "Like I am writing my own story instead of accepting someone else's limitations." That evening, Victor asked her to marry him. They were in the mercantile after closing, reviewing inventory together, when he suddenly set down his pencil and took both her hands in his. "I know it has only been a few months," he said. "I know some would say we should wait longer, be more proper. But I am certain, Clara. I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to build a life with you, support your dreams, share mine with you. Will you marry me?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling so wide her face hurt. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married in October, a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Mrs. Thompson stood as Clara's witness, and one of Victor's fellow mountain men came down from the high country to stand for him. Clara wore a practical blue dress she could wear again for business, and Victor trimmed his beard and looked almost civilized in a new suit. But the vows they exchanged were anything but practical. They promised partnership, equality, unwavering support, and love that would endure whatever hardships the West might throw at them. Their wedding night was spent in a real hotel room, a luxury they splurged on for the occasion. Victor was gentle and patient, and Clara discovered that the strength she so admired in him extended to tenderness. They came together with joy and laughter and whispered promises, and afterward, lying in his arms, Clara felt more complete than she ever had. "My husband," she said, testing out the words. "My wife," Victor replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "My fierce, brilliant wife." They moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, a two-room structure with a good stove and sturdy walls. It was not much, but it was theirs. Clara continued running the mercantile, and Victor continued his odd jobs while also helping with the heavier work at the store. They were partners in every sense, sharing decisions, supporting each other's ambitions, building something solid together. In December, Clara realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She told Victor one evening as they sat by their fire, the winter wind howling outside. "A baby," he repeated, his expression stunned. Then a grin split his face, and he pulled her into his arms with careful enthusiasm. "A baby." "Clara, are you happy about this?" "Yes," she said, clutching him tight. "Scared but happy." "Are you?" "Terrified and overjoyed," Victor admitted. "I lost so much family. The thought of creating more with you, it is everything I did not dare to hope for." They prepared through the winter, Victor building a cradle with his skilled hands, Clara sewing tiny clothes between managing the store. She hired another employee to help lighten her load as her pregnancy progressed. The townsfolk were supportive, offering advice and hand-me-down baby items. Even Pemberton nodded curtly when he saw her on the street, which Clara took as grudging acknowledgement of her success. Their son was born in July of 1907, during a sweltering desert heat wave. The labor was long and difficult, and Victor paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal while the midwife worked. But when Clara finally held their red-faced, squalling infant, every moment of pain evaporated into pure love. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the baby in Clara's arms. Strong and healthy. Victor was allowed in then, and Clara would never forget the expression on his face when he first saw their son. Wonder and terror and overwhelming love all mingled together. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one finger stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "He is perfect," Victor whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never quite decided. Now, looking at her husband's awestruck face, Clara knew. "James, after your father." Victor's eyes filled with tears. "James Wright, I like that." He looked at Clara, his expression fierce with emotion. "Thank you. For this, for everything. You have given me back a life worth living." "We gave it to each other," Clara corrected softly. Adjusting to parenthood was exhausting and wonderful. James was a demanding baby, but Victor proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with his son at night when Clara was too exhausted to move, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every tiny milestone. Clara returned to work at the mercantile part-time after a few weeks, bringing James with her in a basket. The customers loved seeing the baby, and business continued to thrive. By James's first birthday in 1908, Clara had paid off the entire loan to the bank, 2 months ahead of schedule. She insisted on taking Victor to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Rhyolite to celebrate. "You did it," Victor said, raising his glass of wine in a toast. "Built your dream from nothing." "We did it," Clara corrected. "I could never have done this without you. Your support, your belief in me, your partnership. This is our success, not just mine." "Then let me propose an expansion," Victor said. "What if we opened a second location, maybe in Goldfield or Tanapa? The mining towns keep growing and your business model clearly works." Clara considered the idea. She had been so focused on establishing this one store that she had not thought beyond it. But Victor was right. With the right manager, a second mercantile could be successful. That would require significant capital. "We have capital now," Victor pointed out. "Your profits, my savings. And I suspect Pemberton would be forced to offer you a loan if you asked, given your track record." The thought of walking back into that bank, not as a desperate woman begging for a chance, but as a successful businesswoman seeking to expand, was deeply satisfying. "Let me develop a plan," Clara said. "Research locations, calculate costs, project revenue. If the numbers work, we will do it." She spent months preparing, and in early 1909 she walked back into Rhyolite savings and loan with Victor at her side and a comprehensive business proposal in hand. Pemberton's face when he saw them was priceless, cycling through surprise, irritation, and resignation before settling on professional courtesy. "Mrs. Wright, Mr. Wright, what can I do for you?" "I am here to apply for a business loan," Clara said crisply. $1,200 to open a second mercantile location in Tanapa. Pemberton reviewed her proposal with obvious reluctance, but there was nothing to criticize. Her current store's books were immaculate, showing consistent profits. Her expansion plan was sound. Her collateral was solid. After an hour of review, he sighed and nodded. "I can approve this loan," he said, sounding like each word pained him. "Congratulations on your success, Mrs. Wright." "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton," Clara said sweetly. "I appreciate your support." Outside, Victor pulled her into a quick embrace. "I am so proud of you." "Of us," Clara insisted. "We are a team, remember?" The Tanapa store opened in May of 1909 with a trusted former employee as manager. It was an immediate success, serving miners who appreciated the fair prices and quality goods. Clara traveled between the two locations regularly, managing operations and building her small business empire. Victor remained her constant support, handling finances, making repairs, caring for James when Clara traveled. In 1910, Clara became pregnant again. Their daughter was born in February of 1911, a tiny thing with Victor's gray eyes and Clara's determined expression. They named her Lily Grace, and James, now 3.5, was enchanted with his baby sister. "She is so small," he whispered, gently touching her hand. "You were this small once," Victor told him, lifting James so he could see better. "And now you are a big brother. That is an important job." James took his role seriously, always wanting to help with Lily, protective even at his young age. Clara watched her family with a full heart, marveling at how her life had transformed. 5 years ago she had been alone and desperate, laughed at by a banker who saw her as worthless. Now she had a thriving business, 2 locations, a loving husband, and 2 beautiful children. Rhyolite itself changed around them. The mining boom that had built the town began to slow. By 1912, some of the mines were playing out, and people began leaving for richer strikes elsewhere. Clara saw the writing on the wall and made the difficult decision to close the Rhyolite location, consolidating operations in Tanapa where the mines were still producing. "It is sad," she said to Victor as they packed up the store that had been her first dream. "This place gave me my start." "This place was never the dream," Victor said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You were the dream. Your determination, your vision, that goes with us wherever we go." They moved to Tanapa permanently in 1913, buying a larger house with room for their growing family. Clara was pregnant again, and their second son was born in October. They named him Thomas, and he was a cheerful baby who rarely cried. James was now 6, already showing interest in the business, and Liliette, too, was a force of nature who kept everyone on their toes. 3 children, Victor said one night, all the kids finally asleep. He and Clara sat together on their porch watching the stars emerge. "How did we get so lucky?" "Hard work," Clara said with a tired smile, "and finding each other." "Best day of my life, walking down that street and nearly getting run over by an angry woman with big dreams." "I was not that angry," Clara protested. "You were furious," Victor said, laughing, "and beautiful, and so fierce I knew immediately you would change my life." Clara leaned against his solid warmth. "Do you ever miss the mountains, your cabin, the solitude?" "Sometimes I miss the quiet," Victor admitted, "but I would not trade this for anything. You and our children are my purpose now. The mountains will always be there if I need them, but my place is here with you." The years continued to pass, each one building on the last. The mercantile thrived even as other businesses struggled. Clara's reputation for fair dealing and quality goods attracted customers from across the region. She hired good people, treated them well, and they stayed loyal. By 1915, she was considering opening a 3rd location. "You are building an empire," Victor teased her. "I am building security," Clara corrected, "for our children, for their futures. So they never have to beg someone like Pemberton for permission to chase their dreams." In 1916, Clara made a decision that surprised even Victor. She went back to Rhyolite, which was now nearly abandoned, and bought the old bank building for a pittance. Pemberton had left years ago, following the money to California. The grand building sat empty, slowly being reclaimed by the desert. "What are you going to do with it?" Victor asked as they stood in the dusty marble hall where Clara had once been humiliated. "I am going to turn it into a lending house," Clara said. "A place where people with good ideas and sound plans can get funding, regardless of their gender or background. I am going to be the opposite of Pemberton." Victor's smile was proud. "Of course you are." It took 2 years to establish the Wright Lending Company, named for both Clara and Victor since they were equal partners. They hired fair-minded people to evaluate loan applications, established reasonable terms, and focused on supporting businesses run by women and minorities who traditional banks ignored. It was not massively profitable, but it was deeply satisfying. In 1918, as the Great War ended, Clara and Victor celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. Their children were growing, James now 11 and already working part-time in the mercantile, Lily 7, and showing signs of her mother's business acumen, Thomas 5, and more interested in building things like his father. They were a happy, chaotic household full of love and laughter. 10 years, Clara said as she and Victor danced together at the small party their friends had thrown. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "Best 10 years of my life," Victor said, pulling her closer. "Thank you for taking a chance on a mountain man who did not know what he needed until he met you." "Thank you for taking a chance on me," Clara replied, "for seeing me when everyone else looked through me." In 1920, women finally won the right to vote nationwide. Clara celebrated by registering immediately, and she and Victor went to the polls together in the next election. She thought about that day in 1906 when Pemberton had laughed at her, and she smiled. She had proved him wrong in every way that mattered. The mercantile continued to expand. By 1922, Clara had 5 locations across Nevada, each one managed by someone she had personally trained. The Wright Lending Company had helped fund over 30 small businesses, most of them succeeding beyond expectations. Clara was invited to speak at business conferences, to share her story of building success from nothing. She always made sure to credit Victor's support, to emphasize that her achievements were built on partnership. Their children grew into remarkable people. James graduated from high school in 1923 and went to college to study business, planning to eventually take over the mercantile operations. Lily was intensely interested in the lending company, already at age 12 helping review applications and showing a sharp mind for numbers. Thomas loved working with his hands like his father, talking about becoming an engineer. "We raised good humans," Victor said one night in 1924 as he and Clara sat together reviewing their various business ledgers. "We did," Clara agreed. "They are kind, hardworking, and they understand that success comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down." "They learned that from you," Victor said. "From us," Clara insisted. "You taught them as much as I did. You showed them what a good man looks like, what real strength means." Victor reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb rubbing across her knuckles in the familiar gesture that still made her heart flutter after 18 years of marriage. "We make a good team, you and I." "The best team," Clara agreed. In 1925, tragedy struck when a fire destroyed the original Tanapa mercantile location. No one was hurt, but decades of hard work went up in smoke. Clara stood in the ashes, tears streaming down her face while Victor held her tight. "We will rebuild," he said firmly. "We have done it before. We will do it again." And they did. Within 6 months, a newer, larger store stood on the same spot, built with Victor's supervision to be fireproof as much as possible. The grand reopening was a celebration, the entire town turning out to support the business that had served them so well for so long. By 1926, Clara was 43 years old and could hardly believe the life she had built. She owned 6 mercantile locations and a lending company. She had helped dozens of entrepreneurs start their own businesses. She had a husband who loved her unconditionally, 3 thriving children, and respect throughout Nevada as a shrewd, fair businesswoman. When she walked down the street, people greeted her by name, and young women sometimes approached to tell her she was their inspiration. "Did you ever imagine this?" Victor asked one night in early 1927 as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. "When Pemberton laughed at you that day," Clara thought about it seriously. "No," she admitted. "I imagined owning one store, supporting myself, proving I was capable. I never imagined empire, family, legacy. I never imagined you." "I never imagined any of this," Victor said. "I thought I would spend my life alone in the mountains, and that seemed enough. Then you appeared and showed me what life could really be." "We saved each other," Clara said softly. "We did," Victor agreed. "And we built something neither of us could have created alone." James graduated from college in 1927 and returned to Nevada, ready to take on more responsibility in the family businesses. Lily was accepted to college for the fall, planning to study finance and economics. Thomas, now 16, was already being courted by engineering firms impressed with his designs. Clara and Victor watched their children launch into the world with pride and some bittersweet sadness. "They do not need us the same way anymore," Clara said. "No," Victor agreed. "But they will always be ours. And now we have time to focus on each other again, like when we first married." That idea had appeal. Clara promoted several longtime employees to management positions, stepping back from daily operations to focus on strategic decisions. Victor, now in his late 40s, finally admitted that the physical labor of construction and repairs was getting harder. Together, they transitioned into elder roles, advisory and supportive rather than hands-on. In 1928, they took their first real vacation, traveling to San Francisco for 2 weeks. It was strange and wonderful to be just Clara and Victor again, not parents or business owners or community pillars. They walked along the coast, ate in restaurants, attended theater performances, and remembered what it felt like to be the young couple who had fallen in love in a dusty mining town. "We should do this more often," Clara said as they watched ships come into the harbor. "Agreed," Victor said, his arm around her shoulders. "We have earned the right to enjoy our success, not just build it endlessly." They returned to Nevada refreshed and made a decision. They would gradually transition full ownership of the businesses to their children, setting up trusts and legal structures to ensure everything continued smoothly. Clara would keep her hand in the lending company, which had always been her favorite project, but the mercantile operations would go to James. Lily, finishing college, would eventually take over the lending side completely. Thomas was pursuing engineering, but would always have a place in the family businesses if he wanted it. By 1930, the transitions were well underway. The country was entering difficult economic times with the stock market crash, but the Wright businesses weathered it better than most. Clara's conservative financial practices and Victor's insistence on maintaining cash reserves meant they could ride out the storm. They even expanded the lending company's mission, helping desperate people refinance predatory loans and avoid losing their homes or businesses. "This is what it was always supposed to be about," Clara said as she approved another loan for a widow trying to keep her boarding house. "Helping people survive and thrive, not just profiting." "You have a good heart," Victor told her. "It is one of the 1,000 reasons I love you." In 1932, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with all 3 children, their families, and close friends. James had married a lovely woman named Sarah, and they had given Clara and Victor their first grandchild, a baby girl named Clara in honor of her grandmother. Lily was engaged to a fellow banker she had met in San Francisco. Thomas was working in California but came home for the celebration. 25 years, Victor said in his toast at the dinner party. A quarter-century of partnership, love, and adventure with the most remarkable woman I have ever known. Clara, you took a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know how to live among people anymore. You gave me purpose, family, and joy I never thought I would experience. Here is to 25 more years and beyond. Clara, tears streaming down her face, raised her glass. To the man who saw me when I was invisible, who believed in me when I was dismissed, who stood beside me through every challenge and triumph. You are my heart, Victor Wright, today and always. The party lasted well into the night, full of laughter and stories and love. When it was finally just Clara and Victor in their quiet house, they held each other close. "We did well," Clara whispered. "We did better than well," Victor corrected. "We built something beautiful and lasting. Not just businesses or money, but a family, a legacy of helping others, a life of true partnership. That banker who laughed at you must be eating his words wherever he is now." "I do not think about Pemberton anymore," Clara admitted. "He was just an obstacle, one moment in a much larger story. The real story is us. How we found each other, believed in each other, built everything together." "Best story I know," Victor murmured, kissing her softly. The years continued, each one adding new chapters to their remarkable story. The businesses thrived even through the Depression, employing people who desperately needed work, helping families stay afloat. Clara's lending company became famous throughout Nevada for its fair practices, and other states began asking her to consult on establishing similar institutions. Victor finally returned to the mountains in 1935, not to stay but to visit. He hiked up to his old cabin with Thomas, now 24 and curious about his father's past. They spent a week in the wilderness, and when Victor returned, he told Clara it had been perfect. "The mountains are still beautiful," he said. "Still peaceful, but they are not home anymore. Home is wherever you are." By 1940, Clara and Victor were in their late 50s and early 60s, respectively. They were grandparents several times over, respected elders in their community, and still deeply in love. They had lived through boom and bust, prosperity and depression, personal tragedy and triumph. Through it all, they had remained partners in the truest sense. On a warm evening in May of 1940, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The desert stretched out before them, eternal and beautiful. Clara rested her head on Victor's shoulder, his arms solid and warm around her. "You have any regrets?" she asked. Victor considered the question seriously, as he considered all her questions. "Only that I wasted 6 years alone in the mountains when I could have been living. But I needed those years to become the man you deserved, so maybe not even that is a regret." "What about you?" "None," Clara said firmly. "Every difficulty, every challenge, every moment of doubt was worth it because it brought me here to this life to you. If I could go back and tell that young woman standing in the bank while Pemberton laughed at her what was coming, I would tell her to hold on. Tell her that a mountain man with gray eyes would change her entire world. Tell her that the best was yet to come." "It was," Victor agreed, "and it still is. Every day with you is the best day of my life." Clara Wright. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that humiliating moment in the bank to this perfect evening, from desperate hope to realized dreams, from strangers on a dusty street to soulmates who had built an empire together. The banker had laughed at her request for a loan, dismissing her dreams as worthless. But a mountain man had seen her worth, had co-signed not just for the loan but for her entire life, and together they had built something far greater than a simple business. They had built a love that would echo through generations, a legacy of partnership and mutual support, proof that when two people believed in each other completely, there was nothing they could not achieve. Their story became legend in Nevada, told and retold in business schools and lending institutions, in women's organizations and entrepreneurial circles. But for Clara and Victor, it was never just a story about business success or overcoming discrimination. It was a love story, pure and simple. A story about two people who found each other when they needed each other most, and chose to build a life together based on equality, respect, and unwavering support. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Clara took Victor's hand, their fingers intertwining as they had done thousands of times before. They did not need words anymore. After more than 3 decades together, they could communicate in glances and touches, in shared silence and comfortable companionship. They had survived everything the West threw at them, had thrived when others predicted their failure, and had built a love that time only strengthened. "I love you," Clara said, "because some words should always be spoken aloud." "I love you more than words can express," Victor replied, kissing her temple. "Yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows we have left." They stayed on that porch until the night grew cool, holding each other under the vast Nevada sky. Two souls who had found their home not in a place but in each other. The mercantile stores they had built would serve communities for decades. The lending company would help thousands achieve their dreams. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward their legacy of fairness and compassion. But the greatest thing Clara Everly and Victor Wright ever built was each other, transforming from wounded, isolated individuals into a partnership that could weather any storm and celebrate every joy. The banker had laughed, but they had won. Not through revenge or bitterness, but through love, hard work, and absolute faith in each other. And that victory was sweeter than any other could have been. A triumph not just of business but of the human spirit, proving that when you found the right partner, when you built your dreams together instead of alone, anything was possible. Even in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, love could flourish and create something beautiful, lasting, and true.